Welcome to ALGINKGO, your virtual campfire talk with fellow eclectics kindling knowledge synthesis.
Okay, Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all. Thank you for joining us, and especially to you, dear brother Karim. Once again, we're privileged by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to share some time and share some thoughts and knowledge, hopefully, that will increase our insight into what we love about what it is that Prophet Muhammad brought to us and what happened as a result of disobedience, as a result of steering away from his example, even though people claim that they are following his example, which is remarkable, to say the least. You see, whether it is the Sunni or the Shia persuasion or anywhere in between. If I remember correctly, there is a hadith that says something about 72 or 73 sects, and there's only one sect, if you will, and that is the sect that obeys Al-Quran, that obeys the scriptures brought to each population, you see. I mean, there were 124,000 prophets, and the Quran states we make no difference between any of them, you see. And there's a definite difference between what Muslims profess and what the Quran states, you see. So the Muslim professes to follow the Quran, and yet they favor above all these prophets Muhammad. Now, I'm not negating the importance of Muhammad at all, God forbid. However, you see, there is a universal position, and I'm not discussing perennialism here. There is a universal position where people all over the world have been invited to Islam by their own prophets, you see. And this is made very clear in Al-Quran. And Al-Quran does not state anywhere, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, dear brother, after I pass the microphone to you, Al-Quran does not state anywhere that part of the requirement for salvation and to get into the heaven of the afterlife, there is a heaven of the present life, by the way, but the heaven of the afterlife, you see, it doesn't state anywhere that you have to stand up and profess before God and man that Muhammad is his prophet and the one to be followed. There are others, you see. And there are people all over the world who have remained faithful to the best of their ability in the path, the way, the Tao, if you will, of their prophets, you see. And just because Muslims have failed to have a look at the ways of these other prophets doesn't mean that they are exceptional. They are exceptional in one way, however, and that is in professing that they are the ones who possess the only path. They're on the only path, which means they've become just like Christians who say, well, the only way into heaven is through Jesus, and like Jews who say, look, you know, we're the chosen ones. We're the only way you're going to get salvation. So we've got a problem. Muslims have a problem with this kind of chauvinist attitude. And then, you see, it's compounded by all the sectarian persuasions, which have to do also with the madhabs, you see. Now, we know that there's four, maybe six madhabs, and there's probably more that we don't discuss and know about. Um, but in any case, it wasn't the founders of these madhabs, to my knowledge, that created the sect. They were just doing their best at the time to understand what the prophet had brought. They were doing their best to understand the message. It is their students who created the sectarian persuasion and then went into inter-madhab competition with one another. The first thing I was confronted with, well, there were two things I was confronted with when I entered the Muslim Ummah as a privately converted Muslim. I mean, no one preached to me. I read the Quran and I decided that was the way for me, and that was it. But then when I began to associate with organized Islam, I had a problem. I didn't have a sheikh. I didn't need one, you see, to begin with. I mean, there was no sheikh coming to me and tell me, hey, you've got to be a Muslim, all right? There was no one beating me over the head with the Quran. I took it off the shelf and I said, I'm going to read this book finally. It's been sitting on my shelf for years. So I finally read it and I said, hey, gosh, this is the way for me to go. I'm going to walk this path. No sheikh. Okay. If I had a sheikh, it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by virtue of the angel who brought the message to our beloved prophet and by virtue of the people who were faithful enough to record it, which is one of the reasons I took the name Zaid, you see. And if you know that history, you know what I mean. So I had all this knowledge before I became a Muslim. Then I walk into the Muslim territories controlled by their imams, and there's these little fortresses they have called mosques and madrasas everywhere. And the first thing they want to know is who's my sheikh and which madhab I belong to. And I say, well, what's that got to do with anything? They're already judging me, you see, without taking any time to listen to what Allah has placed in my heart and whatever knowledge it is that I am bringing into the Ummah by virtue of my previous experiences and studies, okay, which is substantial. Now, that bias is the result of propaganda. That's what it is. This kind of propaganda results in confirmation bias. It results in compounded ignorance, the bias of compounded ignorance, which means that you're the only one who has the right path to God, you see, and you're going to take the authoritarian position to demand that I do such and such and perform such and such and go to so and so in order to become part of your society, and that society ultimately represents those who are going to be saved in the hereafter. Please, who taught you all this nonsense? Who taught you all this nonsense? Because that's what it is. And I'm scratching my head, you see, for the first several years. And then I come across certain things. For example, like the book, I think the book by a fella, Fazlur Rahman, called the Hadith Wars. I come across that a couple of years later, and I say, hey, well, maybe this is the reason, you see, that all of these fools are running around uh, with their sectarian nonsense and marginalizing people like myself and each other. I mean, I was in a society that in Malaysia, that not too many years before I entered the Ummah there, they refused to let Chinese Muslims enter their Malay masjids because they were Chinese. Where is this in Al Quran? So what I'm saying here in a nutshell is that had it been for the example of the Malay Muslims in particular, I would never have become a Muslim. Never. It was because of the Holy Quran that I became a Muslim and remain a Muslim. No other reason. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that uh, other peoples from other countries who claim Islam are any less chauvinistic. Oh my God, they're worse. And I edited the social study papers and psychological papers that prove it. It's established fact. The worst amongst Muslims, the worst chauvinists amongst Muslims are those from the Middle East, the very worst. And this is the result of sectarianism. This is the result of, hey, I'm the one. Islam belongs to me. I speak Arabic. That was another problem I had. No one took me seriously because I didn't speak Arabic. Oh my God. Does that make me less of a human being? Does that make my cerebral pudding less than yours? Am I less worthy? Am I less pious? Please, where is this written in Al Quran? It's not there. So, what we're involved with in our discussions here with our dear brother Karim is the elucidation of the history and the ideas, the psychological and the philosophical positions that led to this outrageous chauvinism, which is actually destroying Islam. There's a passage I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, brother. There's so many things I need to be corrected about. Um, that says, "Hey, if you don't obey, then I'm going to replace you." You see, this is Allah speaking to the Muslims. If you don't do what you're contracted to do with me according to this arrangement that we have between us, and according to this divinely guided agreement, you see, I'll just replace you. I'll replace you with people that aren't like you, don't look like you, don't talk like you, da 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 da. That means a different language, doesn't it? Of course it does. So, and a different culture. So, Muslims, as best as I can see it right now, are in a very, very precarious position politically, socially, spiritually, metaphysically, intellectually. Okay. You've got a bunch of people running around following thousands upon thousands of traditional lies and claiming that it's religion. And amongst these lies, Brother Karim has demonstrated to us that, hey, you're not allowed to think, according to them. You're not allowed to use this cerebral pudding. And my God, that's one of the first things that I ran into. I started using my cerebral pudding, and they say, you can't do it. And you more so than other people because you don't understand Arabic. I said, oh my God, well, all right. Well, look, I started out just like all the rest of you with this childhood babbling, which is a universal language. We all speak it. We all spoke it in the cradle. It's the same language, and it's more than a fitra. So my fitra is the same as yours, and you're telling me I'm not worthy? Please, I've had enough of this nonsense. People like me have had enough of this Arabic chauvinism. We've had enough of it, okay? And it's time to change our Qibla, if you will, in the way that we think about what our beloved Prophet brought us as Al-Islam. And so, with that having been said, dear brother, let me hand the mic over to you with a question being, well, if there's anything else that you would like to add to what I've just said, or any other thoughts that you've had between last week and today, please, I just leave the floor open so that you can share with us what is on your heart and what Allah has placed on your mind at the moment, inshallah.
Yes, thank you, Brother Omar, for that and for having me here once again to share thoughts with your good self and the listeners. Before I begin, let me just do my usual.
Yes, inshallah.
Yes. Once again, thank you. And the one thought that popped into my mind as you were talking about the person who wants to replace you, if you don't, toe the line.
Mm.
I was thinking that, well, you could actually be quite lucky if that's all that happens to you, that you get only get replaced, because other people have suffered worse fates than that. They
Hmm.
were basically eliminated or disappeared, vanished without a trace. This is not
Hmm.
unknown. So we need to stay vigilant against extremism and this kind of, fanatical, response by some people. Now, in terms of if there's anything new to share, yes, I would like to mention there was a video that was posted just recently on YouTube by Javad Hashmi, who is, I think, a medical doctor, and he's also doing a PhD in Islamic studies at Harvard University. And he had on in his video, it's about the Hadith. A scholar from a recent PhD graduate from Oxford University Press. His name is, from Oxford University. His name is Joshua Little, and they were talking about the Hadith. And Joshua Little apparently has come up with 21 weaknesses in the Hadith.
Hmm.
Now, of course, as a non-Muslim, he takes a somewhat different approach, and he uses what he calls the historical critical approach, which is an approach mostly used by non-Muslim scholars. And I think that it's worth watching the video, although as a Muslim, what we have done subsequently, a friend of mine and I, who is a Muslim from Bangladesh, now living in Texas, working in the IT sector, we set up a room on Clubhouse to discuss that particular video and
Hmm.
share thoughts about it. And my take was that as Muslims, we should take a Quranic perspective on the Hadith, because I think once you take a Quranic perspective on the Hadith, your critique of the Hadith will be incomparably stronger, and credible, I think. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that I would say don't watch the video. I say go ahead, still watch it. But certain questions that would be relevant to a Muslim
Hmm.
and very important for a Muslim were never even touched upon, let alone discussed. So, for example, one such question would be, is the Hadith, Bukhari and the others, revelation? Yeah, can we call it
Hmm.
revelation? Can we say it's coming
Hmm.
from Allah? Are these words in traditions the words of Allah? Of course they are not. Well, then second question, are they the words of the Prophet? Well, I'm sorry, they are not even the words of the Prophet, because they are paraphrases of what the Prophet allegedly said. However,
Hmm.
this point was recognized, and they used an expression that even I had to look up. The expression is paraphrastic. He said they were
I
referring
think
to
that's
the
a new word.
no, actually, it's in the dictionary. It's just that I never
Oh,
come
is it?
across it
Yeah.
in my
Okay.
years and decades in the
Hmm.
academia. This is the first time I came across the word, so I had to
Hmm.
Google it. And
Hmm.
apparently, it just means, like the word begins with paraphrastic. It
Hmm.
just means something whose meaning has been altered by paraphrasing. Yeah.
Hmm.
So they were referring to the so-called paraphrastic quality of the hadith. In other words, that the meaning is distorted through, non-verbatim transmission. In other words,
Yes, of
the
course.
hadiths are the words, actually the words of the transmitters. They are not the words of the Prophet either. So now, another question that would come up would be important for a Muslim is, well, if they are not the words of Allah and they are not the words of the Prophet, and if they are the words of transmitters, then how can we make these narrations, reports, a basis of Islamic law, legislation, which is, even overrules the rulings of Allah Ta'ala in the Quran.
Hmm.
This is
Hmm.
absolutely stunning, catastrophic corruption,
Hmm.
I think, personally, of the
Hmm.
Sharia,
Hmm.
because the penal code part of the Sharia, because as far as I can see, legislation is the sole prerogative of Allah. There are many verses to confirm this. For example, when Allah says, "La hukmu illa lillah," no one can judge except Allah. I think this is referring to matters of Deen. I mean, we can make laws, for instance, about traffic laws and what have you. But that's got nothing to do with the Deen. But the moment it comes to, acts like blasphemy, adultery, or apostasy, this is Allah's prerogative to legislate in these areas. So when the ulama basically allowed the man-made narrations to overrule the revealed rulings on these three, sins, in one case it is a crime, they have actually, I think, fallen into what I'm suggesting we could call juristic shirk, because they have allowed a human being to become a higher authority than Allah Himself. Whoever narrated those hadiths now legislates, and his law replaces the law of Allah. Now, this is a violation also, of course, of the defiance also of the doctrine of Tawheed. So this is just a few examples of the problems that arise from the unwarranted elevation of the tradition to the rank of revelation, and even to a rank where the tradition surpasses, the revelation. And I have touched on this before in our meeting, but just very briefly to reiterate, you see, the hadiths have been elevated above the Quran in three ways. For example, when it is said that the Sunnah judges the Quran, a Sunnah Qadi ala Quran, clearly here we are putting the Sunnah above the word of Allah. So, but Allah presents the Quran to us as the Furqan, the criterion of judgment. So how can we as human beings place another Furqan above this Furqan and say that now human beings are going to judge the words of Allah? This is really blasphemous, if you ask me. Please correct me if I'm missing something. And it is also shows extreme audacity and ignorance at the same time. So now that they don't stop there, they go further. They say the Sunnah can not only judges the Quran, but it can abrogate the Quran. In other words, the words of human beings can cancel the words of Allah. Now, I'm shocked again. How is this possible? How can a human being abrogate or cancel the words of Allah? This is absolutely shocking. Yet, according to Taha Jabir al-Wani, as early as 660, less than 30 years after the demise of the Prophet, the majority of the ulama, and by the way, Taha Jabir al-Wani is a Sunni scholar. He's not a Quran-centric chap, although he does lean towards the Quran, but he still believes in the Sunnah as he understands it. So he says in his book, 2017 IT, that less than 30 years after the demise of the Prophet, the majority of the ulama already agreed that even a solitary hadith can abrogate a Quranic verse. Now, please help me out. What is going on? If this is not a catastrophic collapse of jurisprudence, I don't know what is. And the third one is when the rulings based on a hadith actually replace the rulings of Allah. This is again catastrophic, and also a manifestation of both shirk and incredible audacity and ignorance, I would say, because now we are saying man-made laws are going to replace the laws of Allah. So and it happened in the three cases I mentioned already: apostasy, adultery, and blasphemy. Blasphemy and apostasy are not treated as crimes in the Quran. They are treated as sins, meaning there is punishment for that in the hereafter, but not in the here. Adultery, yes, it is a crime, but it is punishable not by stoning to death, as the tradition alleges, falsely in my view, but 100 lashes, and that has to be supported by the testimony of 4 reliable witnesses. Now, according to my good friend, the late Professor Zaid Hussein Alatas, he informed me personally in one of our many discussions that in the entire history of Islam, in 1,400 years, there has not been a single conviction of adultery based on the 4 witnesses. Can you believe this? So, because of course,
I often wondered about that, because that's almost an impossible situation.
Yeah.
When's the last time anyone who has actually committed adultery and let it be seen by 4 other people, other than pornographic experts? I think this is a very, very valid position, and one that reveals the absurdity of the juristic, juristic shirk. So we got paraphrastic, juristic shirk here. That's an interesting phrase now, isn't it? And I would like to welcome Brother Tanvir, is it?
Yes, welcome. Salam alaikum, brother Tanvir. He's one of Edip Yüksel's friends. We were together recently on a Zoom video, right, brother?
Oh, very good. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And please take a moment to tell us a bit about yourself, if you don't mind, Brother Karim.
Sorry, you want me to introduce myself?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Say again.
Do you want me to say a few words of introductions about myself?
Of course, please, sir.
Okay. Well, I live in the UK. I'm a former teacher, trainer, and currently a psychotherapist. I work as a psychotherapist providing counseling and psychotherapy to local people. So what else can I say? I'm a student of the Quran and come to the view late in my life that the tradition that we have been fed as religion was completely false basis, and it's created a religion which was not founded on the Quran, and therefore I'm in the process of reconstructing my life around what I know now or believe to be the reality, which is the Deen given by the Quran itself. And Quran declares itself to be sufficient and sufficiently detailed and clear enough for ordinary human beings to be able to understand, sufficiently to be able to live a decent life according to God's system.
Alhamdulillah.
So that's, I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say. I'm getting into the final sort of part of my life. I'm not a young man anymore.
Well, we've got an old man's conference here. Okay.
That's it. Hopefully wise too, not just
Yes.
old.
Well, we're trying to become wiser. Oh, we've just lost Brother Tanvir, but maybe he'll
Come back, yes.
sign back in. Amina, if you're listening to us, ask him to sign back in. All right. So, Brother Karim, I like this idea that you've just brought, this phrase, paraphrastic, juristic, shirk. That's going to stick with me, and I think we can use that as a platform for further discussions in this direction, in this realm, because now we've entered into the legalism that has taken over al-Islam. And we haven't really discussed that before. You've mentioned it, but this is and so forth. But this is something that we can discuss a bit more concretely. I think now that we have this wonderful platform, paraphrastic, juristic, shirk. Oh my God, I love that. Now, what this means is what you said, and before I hand the mic back to you, is that God did not establish a separate parliament, amongst men.
That's right.
All
Very
right,
well
so
said.
so we don't have another body of people who are going to paraphrase, who are authorized to paraphrase and reinterpret Quran for us exclusively. I mean, this means that ijtihad is not forbidden, you see, but it is not authorized as a legal position. And if you're going to perform ijtihad to the best of your possibility, to the best of your talents and gifts and knowledge, then you always have to be open to revision in the event that, hey, you've made a mistake. And how do you know you're going to make mistakes? It's because you're human, you see, and this is not revelation, you see. So, if we're looking at the tradition, that's our very initial platform. Hey, these people are humans. This is paraphrastic. Okay, word, word of mouth by word of mouth by word of mouth, handed down over generations, of almost 180 years before any of it's really written down to the best of our knowledge, and then it's expanded beyond that. And as I mentioned, and as Fazlur Rahman Rothman made this wonderful book about the Hadith wars, which no one at the faculty at ISTAC wanted to talk about. No one wanted to discuss that work, you see. So we have this wonderful base now, paraphrastic, juristic, shirk, as the foundation of legalism, you see, in Islam. And this is ignoring the fact that, hey, all of this stuff was word of mouth created by human beings who are subject to error, and it's not our Quran, which is not subject to error, it's subject to misinterpretation by error-prone humans, of course, but the Quran itself, no. So what has happened here is that this word paraphrastic is awfully close to Pharisee, you see. So what we have is a bunch of Pharisees, bunch of Muslim Pharisees who got together and said, hey, we're going to close the doors of private interpretation and forbid our followers the right to exercise their God-given reason, you see, anymore. And they're going to have to follow us, which means taqlid is the rule of the day. And we're the ones who are going to make the laws, and we're infallible. That which is the Vatican position, where the Pope is infallible, which they said about the Shia caliphs, by the way. So the Shia imams, at the very top of their little fantastical pyramid. So what we have is a bunch of error-prone people professing not to make mistakes, saying that you've got to follow us, otherwise you're going to make a bigger mistake and we're going to make you pay for it in this life. Okay? And then you get people like saying, who, like the Malays in Malaysia saying, well, you can't come into our mosque because you're Chinese and you've never been to Mecca and you don't understand Arabic and you're not Malay and you go make your own mosque. This is absurd. And they're professing to be Muslims. They're professing to represent divine law, to represent divine guidance, to represent salvation, the path to salvation. Hey, the path to salvation is universal. It's the Tao. It's the way that is found towards truth, and you can find it in the book of nature. It's very open. You can read that book. Whenever I brought up that book, the book of science, you see, Muslims were not interested in the book of science, not at all. They were interested in how many times you have to wash your hands when you do wudu, and how many germs are removed from your hands when you do the wudu. They considered this to be science, you see. And I attended a couple of scientific, Islamic scientific conferences when I was there amongst them, and there were no scientific papers presented at all. None. No hard science. It was all this soft science having to do with the traditions, you see, what they said, what they remember. And the people who were most impressive were the ones who could recite by memory, okay, these traditions. Now, since we have Brother Tanvir here with us as a psychologist, I would like you to explore that phenomena a little bit with us, if you don't mind, brother, because as a psychologist, you probably have some insight into the social basis for this transfer of authority to those who can memorize. What can you share any insight? I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's just that, hey, you're here. It occurs to me we're having a conversation amongst old men. Let's have at it.
Yeah, I think, my personal thoughts or reflection on this subject is that over the years, the Deen that is portrayed in the Quran has got replaced by religion. And religions are very much the same the world over, whether we look at Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and others. They're all based around a certain set of rituals that, make people feel holy or saved personally. And so the preoccupation is with achieving personal salvation through doing certain rituals and
Oh, we've lost his transmission again. Personal salvation through certain ritual activities. I imagine he was going to get there. But well, let's go back to it then. We'll wait for him to join us. There's something wrong with his connection here. So we'll just have to wait for him to sign back in. But this is an interesting development now in our discussions to have someone like Brother Tanvir join us. All right, because there's wisdom in there's wisdom to be found in the number of counselors. You see, what we're talking about here, what we're getting to and establishing here is a bit of a shura, okay? Because I don't want people to think, hey, this Dr. Omar is establishing a cult. No, no, far be it, God forbid. No, no, that would be just same error, another sectarian persuasion, and we've got the ALGINKGO madhab. You know, no, far be it from me, far be it from me to do that. So, if Brother Tamir comes back to us, and maybe on a weekly basis he can join us, maybe we can form a little old men shura here and get back to it. So anyway, let's get back to your thoughts in response to my comments that, hey, now we have a parliament established by men to help God out. You see, because God needs our help, obviously. So we've got a parliament of paraphrastic jurists performing shirk, okay, and they're stretching the truth. They're stretching what I would like to get Brother Tabir on his perspective on the stretching the function of the left side of the brain, you see, and then they begin to stretch this out, stretch this out, and develop all this mud, okay, which is what our Karnain encountered amongst the people at the western shore where the sun went down, you see. So um, we've got the stretching of the truth, the stretching of man's perspective, and replacing the truth of the Quran with this man made parliament of paraphristics. Okay. Oh, I love that word. I can't say it enough. Thank you for introducing it to me. So, what's your response to that summary, dear brother?
Yeah, thank you, Brother Omar. The thought that popped into my mind as you were talking about the aversion to science among some of our Muslim brothers, it reminded
Mm,
me of a reference in a book called Islam and Science, written
mm,
by Pervez Hoodboy, who is a Pakistani scientist. The book is available online, by the way, free in PDF format.
mm-hmm,
And in it, he refers to a conference which he attended, which was supposedly about Islamic science. And there was a
mm.
fellow there who presented, shared the results of his research that he conducted, and in which he tried to measure the temperature of hell.
Oh, goodness me. Ah, okay.
Well,
So,
well,
how did he descend into that Russian mine shaft that went down so many miles and they could hear the voices of, I don't know,
I
how
have
did he do this?
I have no idea because this professor Hoodboy didn't provide the details of how he carried out the measurement. But
I see. So he left out the section of the paper that includes methodology, right?
yeah, I don't know. It's this kind of science. Yeah, it's
uh,
reminds me what some of the Christians used to do. They used to argue about how many angels can sit on top of a pinhead. You remember?
yes, yes, yes. I remember these absurd things. Well, Listen, people do absurd things with the best of intention. Okay, and if we get Brother Tanvir back here, we can discuss that a bit more in depth from a psychological perspective. But this is a fact of life. You have people who have the best of intentions, and they'll kill you. You see, thinking that they're serving God, and this is as far from service to divine guidance as we can possibly get. Because the taking of a life is like the destruction of all of mankind. That's something that the Quran makes very, very clear. So if they're willing to do that, or they're willing to do what you have harped on so many times in our discussions so far, to go to war once a year just to make sure that they're taking dominion, you see, in the name of God, in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then God forbid, this is this is absurd. So you have people with good intentions performing evil deeds, you see, and calling it, as Brother Tanvir just said, religion. Okay. And it's no wonder that people will then look at Muslims, especially in today's days where they're blowing up people on buses and, whatnot, um, and say, no, no, I don't want any part of that. And as I said before, if I had depended upon the Malay um, representation of Al Islam, I never would have made the conversion. I would never would have crossed over from Christianity to Islam. It just wouldn't have happened. So my conversion was heartfelt, based on an intellectual comprehension of what it is that I read in Al Quran through a imperfect translation, but nevertheless, the translation carries the message. So that means that there's something supranatural, not supranatural about Al Quran. You see, and I say supra because that's a more of a scientific term. It's above what we perceive to be the natural. Okay, it's not separate from it; it's above it, and that means that there's something about Quran that we don't understand. You see, and we don't need a parliament, of people who tell us, well, you can't think anymore, just believe what we tell you. And we don't need such a parliament to help us to understand that we don't understand everything about the Quran. We do need a group of shura, or of people who are dedicated to a conversation, an ongoing conversation that helps us to unravel this knowledge, to reveal it, to perform the apocalypse, which is the revealing of something, you see, and the expanding of this knowledge. When you think about taqlid, it is a contraction of knowledge. It's not an expansion. So if you're going to contract, that means you're cutting off, you see. You're cutting off what otherwise would be guidance. And I come back to this time and time again with my approach to these conversations and others, that, where is the guidance? Where's the fruit of this guidance? Where, please show me. And the closest thing I can get to the fruit of this guidance is a lot of good people with good intentions who are running around in confusion. You see, they have good intentions, they've got a good heart, they know that there's a God, they call him Allah, and they know that Muhammad brought the last of the messages that we can discern, and they know that they're dedicated to this, but between them and their God is this layer of this parliament of paraphrastic jurists, you see. And and so if there's this layer, it's like the Catholic catechisms. It's that they put their own book there, you see. So they the Muslim, the church goer, the rug kisser is trying to get through to heaven, but they got this book, and they keep on banging their head against it, you see. So, what? Excuse me. Um, this is a terrible position to be in because I see this futility. And I've had many, and I'm sure you've had many young students coming up behind you and saying, where's the relevance of Islam? How do I make this relevant? How have you responded to these students, dear brother?
Well, yeah, you see, I before I would begin my lectures, and I was hired mainly to teach English, Shakespeare in English, and creative writing
Mm,
subjects dealing with communication English and so on. Um, but however, I would still spend maybe the first 10 minutes or so of my class, as I mentioned, I think in one of our earlier talks, doing a little sort of a getting in touch with the reality out there in the real world, sort of like a mini khutbah of my own, so to speak, where I would share
mm-hmm,
some thoughts with my students and
mm-hmm,
well, from time to time discuss the odd issue. But I found that whenever I touched on the more sensitive, issues, for example, death penalty for apostasy, my students became very reluctant to discuss it, and I remember even one of them in the back, a boy saying, "Oh, that's Akida or whatever. I'm not touching that." That's basically what he was telling me.
mm-hmm,
So I found it almost impossible to talk to my students, about these issues relating to the Sharia. Another time I tried to bring up the question, well, if the penalty for adultery is stoning to death, how come Allah Ta'ala did not include it in the Quran?
mm-hmm.
Because he apparently included the penalty for fornication, which is sex between unmarried people, 100 lashes. That is the traditional explanation. But the punishment for, adultery, which is a worse sin, because here a married person is having sex with someone other than his
Mm-hmm.
wife or
Yes.
husband. So I was asking, well, how is it that Allah would have included a penalty in the Quran for the smaller crime, but not include a punishment for the greater crime? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
Because if it is punishable, then how come the only the punishment for fornication is present and not for adultery? Of course, the answer is that there is no punishment of stoning in the Quran for adultery. That is
Mm-hmm.
come from the Hadith. Once again, the
Mm-hmm.
jurist, and according to Muhammad Shahrur, by the way, in his book called Quran Morality and Critical Reason, which is the only book that has been translated into English from Arabic, it's available, by the way, online, free in PDF format. I highly recommend it. It's my number two source, so to speak, after the Quran. I think this is the best book on Islamic issues that I have come across anyway
Mm-hmm.
today in the literature. Of course, there are others, but he is very direct. He takes the bull by the horns, so to speak, and I like that. He doesn't beat around the bush. He goes right
Very
into
good.
the bush.
Excellent.
Yeah, if you like. Yeah, he took a fair
Mm-hmm.
bit of flack for that, of course, but
I'm sure.
anyway, so I found that after a while, when I saw this reticence on the part of my students, and also another thing I noticed in that student or some of
Mm-hmm.
the students when I touched on these issues, they suddenly, some of them, or at least I remember one clear case, the student began to look demoralized,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that really shocked me because I have been a teacher for 20 years. I spent 20 years in a classroom full time in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, 3 years, and the rest of it here in Malaysia. And I see the purpose of the teacher as to demoralize a student is one of the worst things a teacher can do. Our
Mm.
job is to do precisely the opposite: is to raise the spirits of raise the morale of the students, to give them confidence, rather
Yes.
than to demoralize, because the moment you demoralize your student, you demotivate him, and then he will not
Yes.
want to learn anything at all. This is a very,
Yes.
very serious. In fact, we know from the Quran that Iblis, the word Iblis actually means someone who is in despair, you see. So
Mm-hmm.
we as teachers, we are not supposed to plunge people into despair. We are plunging them into the arms of shaitan, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
immediately stopped talking about it and I changed the subject, and I rarely came back to it afterwards, you see,
Mm-hmm.
because I think they are not ready for it, you see, for this kind of discussion. These were mostly students who came from religious schools to me, you see, from
Mm-hmm.
Johor, Kelantan. They all attended these
Yes.
religious
Yes.
madrasas and what have you. They were fine students, don't get me wrong, very well behaved, very polite, very pious, all
Mm.
that. They've got all, and they were smart too. It's not that they were not intelligent, they are.
Yes, yes.
It's just that they were taught not to think that much or not to think too much,
Mm.
especially about matters relating to the Deen, to the
Oh, yeah.
faith. And I think this is a very, as I mentioned in our discussions before, I consider the repression of reason or rationality to be the four of the big mistakes that the traditional paraphrastic jurists and mufassirun, committed. You
Yes,
see,
yes, yes,
so
yes.
I think to snap out of it, the Ummah has to go back to the Quran, as Brother Tanvir I think also would agree. But before we can go back to the Quran and begin to understand it, we need to do something else as well, which is to start using this one here, the occult.
Mm.
It won't do
Yes.
you any good if you read the Quran without using this one, because our
Mm.
students already know how to read the Quran, and they
I
will read
see.
it to you beautifully, but without comprehending almost very little, comprehending very little of what they read. Now, this is just unbelievable. So they give you the impression of being knowledgeable of the Quran, but the reality is that they are quite ignorant of the content of the Quran. And it is not only the students who suffer from this. I've had people from different parts of the world tell me the same thing. Mr. Abdul Karim, I know how to read the Quran, but I don't understand anything I read. I had people from
Yes.
Bangladesh
Mm.
tell me this, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Malaysia, all
Yes,
over the place. This is a
yes,
global phenomenon. This is a new kind of jahilia, actually, you see.
yes.
And what is particularly pernicious about it, if you ask me, is that it is being disguised by the beautiful recitation that these very same people can do. So that hides the problem. The problem is lack of comprehension. And this is due
Mm.
to the very bad teaching of our, paraphrastic jurists or ulama, who tell the people, don't use your brain when you read the Quran. You are not capable of understanding it. The Quran is too difficult. They are completely contradicting what Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, where He says the Quran is easy to understand. You see, four
Yes.
times repeated in Surah Al-Qamar, verses 17, 22, and two other verses, and that it is a clear book. The
Mm.
Mufassirun are telling her, no, it is not a clear book. It needs us or the Hadith to explain it, as if Allah needed help to make Himself clear. This is very
Mm.
disrespectful, not only to the Quran, but to Allah Himself. How
Yes.
dare they make such statements which fly so directly in the face of what the Quran, what Allah is teaching us? And now, doesn't Allah tell us also the Quran is coherent? We will not find, contradictions in it. Well, what do the ulama
Yes.
say? The Mufassir? Oh, no, 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 no. There are many, many contradictions in the Quran, anywhere from 5 to 500. Are you ready for this?
Yes, yes.
500 contradictions, and they need to be resolved. They invented a new methodology, a very corrupt methodology called the theory of abrogation. Now they are abrogating the words of Allah. They
Yes.
themselves are doing it, yet they are
Yes.
putting the blame on Allah, saying it is Allah who abrogated the 120 peace verses in the Quran by the verse of the sword, ayah Saif in Surah number 9, verse number 5. What lunacy! The
Mm.
Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali of Al Azhar University calls it, and I'm quoting him, pardon my harsh expression, but it's not my words, it's his words. He calls it, I quote, crassest stupidity, end of quote, the
Yes.
belief in
Yes.
the abrogation of the peace verses by the ayah. So what we see here is probably something worse than just paraphrastic juristic shirk, a complete collapse of rationality. Would any reasonable person make such statements and even subscribe to the doctrine of abrogation? This is
Mm.
catastrophic. But please
Mm.
correct me if I'm overstating the case, but I just cannot believe this. I'm
Well,
still, after all these years that I've been working on it, I'm still trying to digest it, as it were, to come to grips with it.
this is a phenomena that strikes the Muslim student, and it's a slap in the face that's very, very difficult to deal with. And from a psychological perspective, I would like to ask Brother Tanvir what he has to say, and maybe return to the answer that he was giving a few minutes ago. Welcome back, brother. Um, what I see happening is that there's a certain amount of conditioning that takes place in all, as it does in all political bodies. In the Muslim body, instead of saluting the American flag, they're saluting the Star and Crescent. So, and this conditioning begins at the on the knee of the parents and is continued with the madrasa, and they are conditioned to just memorize, repeat. They become parrots, and it becomes a community obligation, and it provides its own safety net. So it's terribly difficult to withdraw from this safety net. Okay, you have to have a certain degree of protean character in order to do this. So, uh, Brother Tanvir, let me ask you again: how how does this whole phenomena work from your perspective? How have you seen it work against the ummah, against the community, and what kind of problems are you seeing as a psychologist as a result of this?
Yeah, I apologize for the interruption. I don't know, my internet is working fine, but maybe it's the first time I've used this platform. And so, I've sort of gone to the trouble of signing up. So I'm hoping that it will stabilize.
Yes.
So I apologize for the interruption that happened earlier. I grew up in a Muslim, Sunni Muslim household. So I have lived through most of the experience that are experienced by the ummah, the Muslim ummah, and because I've seen them at close quarters. And this conditioning does start indeed from birth. When a child is born and somebody wants to say the azan in the ear
Yes.
onward, the whole process is set in a fabric, of culture and rituals and events and festivals and celebrations and all the rest of it. So it's very much fabric of a whole society. Uh, I think, I would say fundamentally there's a vested interest by the priestly class, as there always is, who hold the keys, or they are the gatekeepers to the religion. And you can understand this better if you realize that, when people have vested interests, they do not want people to bypass them because they become irrelevant if they do.
Yes.
So the so-called learning, Islamic learning, is primarily to memorize what has already been thought out by other people, either in the past or present. So the students really pride themselves in how much they've learned from other people's conclusions and problem solving that has been worked out maybe in the 4th century or whatever. They are not encouraged to do any critical thinking or to use their brain. That's number one, kind of sin, is to start thinking for yourself, because that would be really, really very, very dangerous. And people are frightened of very early on in their life not to start thinking. So I think, it becomes very, very difficult for somebody who's lived their life immersed in such a community to actually start thinking individually for themselves. It would need a heroic kind of a response, the sort that we cited in the Quran for Abraham. He alone stood up and saying, he looked around and he realized this was all wrong. And he's therefore held up as a beacon of example of, and in fact, Prophet Muhammad is also told to follow the example of Abraham, because he stood up against all this priestly class and the spinners of, the controllers of knowledge in any society. And this has happened very forcefully in the Islamic religion. To some extent, the Christians and the Christianity and Judaism have sort of like fallen by the wayside, largely ignored by the societies in which these religions exist. But Islam is very much still in power. And by that, I mean the priestly class is in power in a very
Mm-hmm.
active manner.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that's the number one obstacle that prevents people from doing any kind of independent thinking. The Quran has largely been put to one side as bringing of blessings. So, if you are told that every letter of the Quran that you pronounce gives you 10 blessings to be counted, on the day of judgment, uh,
Mm-hmm.
then people are, as I said to you earlier, that they are preoccupied with building this bonuses in the hereafter.
Mm-hmm.
They're really
Yes.
not interested in the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you an example, a very recent example, only yesterday, my wife received a text message on a WhatsApp, a recorded message
Mm-hmm.
from a Muslim lady who is alerting all the other Muslim ladies to be on the lookout for the start of the month called Rajab, because it's such a holy month
Mm-hmm.
that God has named it as His month, and,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore there are great rewards for fasting in this month, which will
Mm-hmm.
lead to gates of hell being closed. If you fast for
Mm-hmm.
7 days, if you fast for 8 days, then the gates of heaven are open. And if you
Mm-hmm.
fast for another 10 days or something, something else happens. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so she's virtually guaranteeing salvation
Mm-hmm.
in this month for anybody who wants to take this up. And she gave an example of a lady who had something really important to do in terms of going out shopping to purchase something for her family, but she
Mm-hmm.
put that to one side and instead decided to fast.
Oh
So
gosh.
this
Yeah.
was this was more relevant, and she would then expect on the day of judgment to
Mm-hmm.
see immeasurable rewards offered to her by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he will say, this is what it amounted to, what you could not see. Your fasting has led to this, and your recitation of the Quran has led to this, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it was a complete fabrication and a lie,
Mm-hmm.
because there is not a mention of the month of Rajab in the Quran, let alone God claiming it as a holy month. So, I encourage my wife to respond to that and say, well, this lady is telling a complete fabrication, because she's
Mm-hmm.
referring to the Quran, and there's not a single word in the Quran regarding this phenomena that she is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm afraid this is where the state of the so-called ummah is.
Mm-hmm.
It's personal salvation and expectation that somehow, because we are born in a Muslim household and called Muhammad or something of that nature, that on the day of judgment we're going to get special treatment, because all
Mm-hmm.
the other communities are going to be cast to hell, no question
Mm-hmm.
asked. But the Muslims, some of them may well be subject to punishment, but
Mm-hmm.
of course, with Muhammad's intercession, there is
Mm-hmm.
no question that we will eventually end up in paradise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even if you spend 40,000 years in hell.
Yeah, I mean the hope. I mean there is somebody was reading some tradition to me and saying that when all the judgment has been done and all the things God has judged everyone and sent whoever he wants to send to hell and sent others to paradise,
Mm-hmm.
then there will be one man still sitting, and it will be Prophet Muhammad. And
Mm-hmm.
God will then ask him, what are you still doing here? It's all done and finished with now. And he will say, well, how can I go to paradise when some of my people are still in hell?
Mm-hmm.
So because he is so beloved of God, eventually God will have to relent
Mm-hmm.
to his wishes, and take out all the Muslims he's accidentally put into hell.
Mm.
So, this is not that far different from the salvation that Christ earns, the Jews, the
Yes.
Christians,
Yes.
and the Jews claiming that they're not going to go to hell because they are, children of Abraham or Bani
Yes.
Israel. So
Mm-hmm.
they are God's children, special children.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So Islam or the Muslims have really come to very similar points in their development,
Mm.
just like different names and places and things, but it's exactly the same. It's become another religion.
Yes, it has. Well, thank you, dear brother. I want to welcome Sister
Annie.
Ani.
Annie.
Hi, Annie.
Annie Zonderveld.
Hi.
Hi,
Yes, welcome,
honey.
sister.
Good to see
Please,
you.
I'm Dr. Omar Zaid. Welcome to this little discussion. I'm so happy to see a lady join us. I can't tell you. I'm so very pleased. Alhamdulillah. Annie,
Thank
would
you.
you please introduce yourself to our listening audience, because this will be published, even if
Sure.
you're only with us for a few minutes. Tell us about yourself and how it is you came to join us.
Okay. So my name is Ani Zonneveld. I'm the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values. I'm based here in Los Angeles, and I've been very active in the advocacy of human rights in the context of Islam. So a lot of the discussions that you've been having today is very relevant to the psychology and to how the actual, well, pardon my language, but the bastardization of Islam
Sure.
is in the field itself and how it impacts real people. So this is the sort of work that I've been doing for 15 plus years. I am a fan of Abdul Karim, who I listen to all the time, and I met Tanvir at the Oxford Muslim launching organization last year. And so I'm pleased to meet you, Omar Zaid. So my question is, this has been very, we were talking about contradictions earlier on, and I'm just wondering, what is your take on the Surah of Lut, Prophet Lut, where he was giving up his daughters to the rapists? And I've really never been able to rationalize through this this particular verse or the way it's being interpreted anyway. And by the way, I am Malay from Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
So, however, the way I was raised, Alhamdulillah, I was not raised in a mosque community, and that is largely because we lived abroad most of the time, and so my Islam is really the examples of my parents who exuded nothing but equality and egalitarian values towards all people, regardless of race, religion. And so that is what's have shaped my Islam. So if someone
Wonderful.
could address that verse, that would be
Well,
great.
let me take a stab at it. I mean, I don't recall the verse itself right now, and I'm no Islamic Quranic scholar. But from what I understand of this verse, from the Talmudic perspective, from the biblical perspective, Lut was confronted with a horrible situation, and rather than insult God by allowing the angels, you see, to be molested by the citizens, he offered his daughters instead. It was more of a gesture, and I'm not sure that he was prepared to go through with it, but. Listen, when you're in situations like that where life and death is at stake, you have to make certain decisions almost instantaneously based on what those circumstances are. I know as a doctor, I had to make life and death decisions based on the circumstances and the limitations of the tools and the people at my disposal in the emergency room. So certain people who presented had to wait. Others were in greater danger of losing their life, and I would have to attend those first. And those who were in greater danger, sometimes they couldn't be saved, and I would have to make the decision. Well, we have to leave them and go to the ones who could be saved. These triage decisions are made instantaneously based on experience, based on knowledge, and based on what you perceive of the situational awareness, you see. So I imagine that Lut was faced with a very, very difficult situation. I'm not sure that he was informed as to how powerful these angels were. Perhaps at the moment when they knocked on his door and he allowed them entry, they just appeared as human beings, you see, and he didn't know what they were really there for until afterwards. I don't know. Anyone else have a take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult passage to really explain away so easily, but it could be a combination of things. It's alluded to as this is what Luth said in response when he felt an imminent threat that his honored guests, would be attacked. We don't know what the gesture was either as to what he means that here are my daughters, because he knew that one of the issues in that community was there was very little interest in those people in his daughters, and just as you were talking, there was one other thing it was coming to my mind as to. I'm not sure how many people actually were with Lut when he was actually eventually saved from that community. We know that his wife was left behind. And so I'm not even sure how many members of his household were actually of, the same like-minded or who were part of that community. So we're not given any information about the state of mind of his daughters, whether they were part of his group or whether they were part of the general community. So there's a whole host of unknowns. So I wouldn't like to just hazard a guess as to what he meant and what he was trying to do and so on, except that one gets the impression he felt an immediate danger of attack his honorable guests, and because they were in his house, he was, the tradition is that he's responsible for their health and safety.
Yes,
which was paramount in his mind. And I suppose, whether it was your sons or your daughter, whoever was around, you would put them up there to ward off the attack.
no.
So that's as much as I can say. I couldn't say any more about it that would make any sense anyway.
Yeah, if I may, the way I recall reading that verse in Abdullah Yusuf's translation of that verse, he adds a certain expression in brackets. Well, after he says, "Here are my daughters," and then he opens a bracket and he puts "to marry," and then he closes the bracket.
Yeah.
So according to that translation, he was offering these people to marry his daughters, not to, take hold of them straight away and, whatever. So he was saying, "Here are my daughters to marry." Now, whether that is the correct rendition of the verse or not, or whether there's a better way to render it, maybe I should raise this question with Brother Edip Yüksel. And by the way, Sister Annie is a good friend of Edip Yüksel. I don't know whether you knew that. So we have here a gathering of the friends of Edip Yüksel. Have you ever met Edip, by the way,
Yes,
Brother Omar?
yes, I had one session with him last year, and then we never managed to connect again because his schedule was not conducive to arranging another meeting. And we did, and on that occasion, I had a bit of an emergency, so I had to cancel. We never followed up, but I'd love to. I love Brother Edip. Yeah, I mean, he's just wonderful. He's one of the brightest minds on the planet's surface right now. And I'm very, very honored that you, his students, and his compatriots have decided to join this wee session. I'm hoping, frankly, that we could continue on maybe on a weekly basis, or whenever it is that you can meet. Now, you see, brother Karim and I, we have established a pattern now. It's our habit to meet every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. New York time. So if that's comfortable for you, please, dear brother and sister, please join us, because this is a wonderful opportunity to expand this conversation and to include other perspectives. The more perspectives we can entertain, the more we can expand our knowledge and understanding. That's my position. I don't want to be exclusive, although there are what I call people of the mud that I don't want to waste my time with, and and I think that brother Yusuf, your brother Edip is also very conscious of his use of his time, and I don't want to waste time with people who are just going to present futile arguments or questions that have nothing to do with the subject matter, other than to defend their indefensible positions. I don't want to entertain those kinds of conversations. But if we can expand our knowledge base, and I'm including here knowledge is based on experience. You see, now I think between all of us here, we've got more than 100 years worth of human experience in different venues that will be of great benefit to whoever it is that Allah allows to join us or to listen to these conversations as we publish them on the internet. So I'm so happy to see you, and I'm particularly happy, Sister Ani, to welcome you. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and praying for a feminine presence here, a woman who can articulate her position solidly, concretely, and to not just challenge the male position, but to complement it as it's supposed to be complemented. You see, so welcome, Alhamdulillah. God bless you for taking this small step. So, with that being said, if there's anything that anyone wants to add before we close here, because we've been on air for over an hour now, and I don't want to test the patience of our listeners or even each other. Anyone have anything to add to what we've just been discussing?
I thank you for the kind words, Omar, but I just always want to close on a positive note, because
Yes.
it's easy to feel in despair with the
Mhm.
state of the Ummah. But from the work that we've been doing in human rights context, and I've been working in Africa a lot, as well as in Malaysia, there is a real awakening of what the real Islam is, and we're talking
Mhm.
about verses of countering the verses or the interpretation of the verses on domestic violence, for example, or
Mhm.
even retraining imams in how they teach children. So we
Mhm.
actually have curriculums in madrasas that actually teach the values of the Quran and not just memorizing the recitations and the verses. And so this is actually really having an impact in the societies that we've been working on. So I just want to share with you that inshallah, the next generation is going to be better.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so happy to hear this because you see, a person like myself, I'm now kind of stepped back, kind of like from out. If you take a person like me out of the example is the Hindu culture at the village level. You see, the elders like me, we retire at about the age of 70 or so, and then they place us outside the camp. So we have our own little cubby hole, our own little cabin outside the camp, and we have nothing to do with the happenings, the decisions that are made in the camp. you see, by the next generation and their people, so that, our families and those who love us, they would bring us our meals and make sure that we're taken care of. Um, and every once in a while, after they would bring a meal, they would sit down with the elder and say, "I have a question for you, grandfather." You see, and then the grandfather would lend his ear and then say, "They've got a problem. How would you solve this? What would your approach be?" And then the grandmother would make a a contribution, a suggestion, you see, based on experience, knowledge from experience, you see. And so I'm in that position right now. So, sister, I am so happy to know what's going on in the camp. Thank you very much, and
You got
please
it.
try to keep old folks like me informed, because we just kind of sit back and we're not involved anymore, but we still have something to offer. And I like to think of myself as someone who's sort of facilitating this kind of exchange, you see, of information, of knowledge, of wisdom, of experience, of of anything that's going to help the coming generations to learn what they need to learn in order to survive and improve their actual experience of survival as servants of divine guidance. You see, so I welcome you, and Brother Tamir. Oh, very very wonderful to have you. I would like to have your. So we have what we have is we have academia represented here by Brother Karim, a very very solid foundation. We have an active. Female presence in the sociological realm, who's actually not just talking but doing. Wonderful. I'm so happy about that. And we have a psychologist who's, if you had a beard, you'd be going like this, you see, and you're reflecting, and we can bounce our own thoughts and our own queries off of someone like yourself, so you can become our private Jordan Peterson, you see. So, excuse me. So, with that having been said, anyone else want to add something before we close?
Brother Omar, you must be aware that there is already a session going on Friday, every Friday by Edith, the Quran study session, which he only started 2 weeks ago.
Oh, I see.
So I think, it might be an idea that, we try and pool our gatherings so that, more people can benefit. Because time is going to be issue in trying to coordinate different times, and I am aware that I'm not going to be able to be present every week at this time. I couldn't do it because I have appointments, I have clients to see to. As much as I would love to, I think there should be more and more of these occasions for people who are focused on the Quran to connect and support each other, and to give each other moral support to continue the good work that they do. I definitely think that we are somewhat isolated, because I do find it difficult to reconnect with my old community anymore, because I am just not on the same same page anymore.
Yes.
So I think this is one of the things, is to break this isolation, and for more and more people who are Quran centric to connect, or create more opportunities to do so, and not hide. We've nothing to be afraid of.
Yes. Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you, brother. Please join us when you can and keep us informed. I will depend on one or the other of you to send me that link for Brother Edip's Friday and sessions, and if I can join, I will certainly join in with you. Alhamdulillah. I'm sure my wife Amina will as well, because she's keenly interested in these things. So With that being said, Brother Karim, you have anything to say before we close?
No, not really. Just I would like to welcome our two new visitors and guests, and I hope that we will see you again, or as much as is possible. By the way,
Yes.
that meeting with Brother Edip, he is holding it Fridays at 2100 hours GMT.
Yeah.
So for me, that's 5 a.m. In the morning. But you know, I guess one has to make sacrifices from time to time. But I don't know about the others. But yeah, let's hope that we can synchronize this in a way that meets everyone's needs and is compatible with everyone's commitments and schedule. But once again, welcome to our new guests, and inshallah, we'll have another excellent discussion the coming week.
Thank you very much, brother. Then, with that having been said, I will say, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Islam.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.